there's a lot of rent-seeking power in the process of the listing.
This interview is behind the scenes of billion-dollar exchanges, a world of hidden fees, mysterious intermediaries, and shocking truths.
Paid quite a bunch of money, maybe around like $1 million for this partnership, and we found we're still not getting listed.
From market makers controlling liquidity to exchanges demanding more than you ever imagined.
For a lot of other projects, market maker is a devil. Project team will give a lot of tokens to the market makers. The market maker can manipulate the price.
This isn't just about one coin. This is about how the entire system works.
In Jonathan's words, act in a more organized way. And I feel that the sharing of this information can clear off some basic facts and make people understand where we are.
Supported by Kaspa Finance, the first V3 DeFi protocol on Kaspa. Igra Labs, atomic programmability on a Kaspa block DAG. Cascade, use your Kaspa without selling it.
Today, I'm joined by Junny from KEF. Good to see you again, Junny.
Yeah, nice seeing you again. It's been a little while, huh?
Yeah, it's been a couple of months. So Junny, last time we connected was in August. I thought I'll start with, what's keeping yourself and KEF busy last couple of months?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things we have done and the community is aware of is we went through London for the event, and where Jonathan was also part of the event. I got to meet a lot of KASPA community members, like the Wolfies Bar. That was an awesome event. Again, that, because of the outbreak of COVID, for a long time, we haven't been really have an active offline community event. And this trip to London does remind me of getting to know, a real human being and how to help with it, right? I can tell you a little story because, we kind of lost our booth design in the UK. So we have to bring stickers, very big stickers to put it on the booth. And, the booth was really huge and it was really tall up there. So I cannot get you there myself. And I think it was Wolfies from Wolfies Bar and also a few other community members helped build the entire booth. And that feeling is very different. I think that's a very
amazing.
Pleasant experience. Yeah, that's one of the things. And other than that is trying to speak with more exchanges, including Binance and HTX, as people know. So that's something KEF is always busy doing in terms of layer 1 KASPA support. Other than that, in September or October, actually, like you had the KASPAX EVM layer 2 online. So that's a part on the EVM side or L2 side of the KEF work. Trying to look for projects that want to build there. So that's briefly it. Yeah.
Right. So for today's session, though, I wanted to have you over to discuss specifically exchanges and market making, right? But before we get into just a question, actually, one of the community members asked this morning, which is, we know KEF actually pays for some of the core developers, pays for events, and obviously KASPAX, right? But the person asked actually, how does KEF actually makes money? So I thought we can start with this first and then move straight into the exchange discussion.
Sure. So actually, by the time that the KEF was founded, there was a model of design. Basically, it's actually saying we're going to share our revenue or profit with a part of the community. By then, some community members were invited to the meetings. So there was a structure and a constitution of the foundation on that regard. The tricky question is that it's factually true that KEF doesn't really have a profit or net profit so far. The original expectation that we can generate this return by investing in ecosystem projects. But most of the ecosystem projects are not that successful as we expected. So yeah, indeed, we don't generate any direct profit or income for now. But I'd also want to highlight that so as a foundation that raises capital from the limited partners, it's also true that we are not working in a very myopic way, which is to say that, if we're not making money this year, the LPs will not just run after us and kick my ass and saying, hey, Johnny, we're not making money for me. I think partly this is because that, some a lot of people already know that one of the major contributor or LP of KEF is Beijing, which just went public. They see potentially the return on investment elsewhere because they sell the cost miners. But that is not a expected profit or return for the KEF. But that's maybe something that will make the LPs happy, or be patient enough, right? And it's just a common fact. If you're a closed fund, you'll have like 5 to 7 years to get back to your LPs before, so that's why we're working very long term, not caring really about the income, right?
So what you're saying is essentially, you're not focused on revenue generation as for now, right? Maybe that'll come later on. And you had initially a pot of investment that got given to you through your LPs, limited partners, and that's keeping you afloat. Is that the right statement?
Yeah, that's a correct statement. And precisely due to that reason. So later on we jump to these topics about like giving loans to market makers. We're the ones who care about our coins. KASPA as well, because they come at a cost from the LPs, and we just sell it. We have a problem. But yeah, actually, it's we would add. Actually, starting from this October, when KASPAX EVM is online, so the revenue coming to as gas fees going to KASPAX is part of the KEF revenue, and also the curve bridge. Those fees do go to KEF. I think that's is very clear and transparent. We will definitely use those income to share with the community and to keep doing marketing campaigns. We'll have a clear roadmap or document or illustration, at least for the latest by the beginning of next year, so we can let people know about what we're trying to do. We used to have a close discussion with some of the community members talking about our design and consult their opinions on this, but we are going to make this public as soon as possible. Yeah.
One day you think you'll make your revenues public? So the revenue coming from KASPAX or coming from even the curve bridge, do you think you'll one day make it public, open to people?
Sure, great. So look, I think like one of the things that I'm always a little bit confused about offering transparency is that should I just feed the facts, or should people just go up and explore by themselves?
It's not easy. Yeah, I agree with you.
Because look, like we think that is relatively transparent already, because the gas fee on L2 per transaction is can be found out, right? And you can also find out how many transactions are going on L2, so you can easily calculate the revenue. The only missing part is you don't know my cost, so you cannot calculate my profit, right? Similar story for curve. So we have made it very clear on the ratios, and you want to calculate based on the wallet addresses that has a total amount of lot KASPA. You can always get to that number. But yeah, I will be happy to share. So I think we have been collecting around 150,000 KASPA for most around these fees. Apparently this is not our objective, and we hope to see that there's a big growth on users as we are trying to persuade for instance Solana and BNB users to come to KASPA. So that's our objective.
Yeah, it's not a lot of fees, right?
Right. And we think it's not a lot.
Yeah. Obviously, but it's from my perspective, it's good that the more transparent I think you guys are, KEF is, the better I think will be for everyone, right? So that's great, and I'm glad that I could ask you this question. So thank you, Junny. So let's move forward, right? Let's get into our discussion for today's session, right? So our today's session, as I said, is quite unique because it's actually initiated by yourself, right? And you wanted to come on the show to discuss two topics, right? Exchanges and market making. People obviously use exchanges. People spend a lot of time on exchanges. Not many people understand market making. So market making is actually going to be very interesting. But also along with that, the actual functioning and the plumbing of exchanges is going to be very interesting for everyone who's probably new to it or never heard of these things. So why don't we get into it and perhaps start at very high level? What does it mean to list a coin like KASPA on a centralized exchange for someone who's brand new to it?
Sure. So I will have some slides to share, but I can also share that later. But just to get this question first. So it means if they want to interpret a new token on a base L1, for instance, like Trump token or Solana, it doesn't really it isn't that difficult, right? If they already integrate Solana, then they can just the connecting top. But integrating another layer one coin is a different story. So they have to have their engineers to basically get your nodes data as well, and to make sure that they're interpreting that chain. And considering maybe like there will be a lot of users using it, so they have to make sure this chain is secure. It won't have any security risk, and it can serve their customers. So that is what is meant by interpreting a layer one coin with spot. If you're just interpreting with the perps or futures, that's way easier. It's just literally not adding any new assets to the portfolio or to the management of the centralized exchange. So that is what we mean by that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And I know you've just mentioned you've got some slides for us, so feel free to share if it's easier now. But some facts, right? Like and you can correct me if I got these wrong. So Kaspa is currently listed across 80-ish exchanges, and as of last 24 hours, it did 18 million trading volume compared to what Bitcoin is doing, $48 billion in daily trading volume.
Yeah, sure. So, by the way, you can see the slides now, right?
Yes, I can see the slides.
So I will cover this topic, later on. I think I have a table somewhere in order to show the volume. But before that, I also want to briefly explain why I want to do this session. So I think that a lot of the times that everyone cares about the listing of Kaspa on a new exchange, because it really means it will bring in new volume or new buyers, and there will be potentially a nice price movement. However, I feel that we're trying to help the Kaspa price and the Kaspa ecosystem in different ways. But at this moment, it's very important to for us to form some kind of coordination or convergence, in Jonathan's words, to just act in a more organized way. And I feel that the sharing of this information can clear off some basic facts and make people understand where we are and what might be the best strategy to help Kaspa. Sometimes to do the Kaspa noise, that's definitely very helpful. Sometimes there are also other things that can be done, or at least I think this session can help people understand what's in the brain of, let's say, CZ and a centralized bringer, their brains.
People may not know this, right? There's a cost of listing any token coins on centralized exchanges, not free. So why don't we start with that cost of listing for Kaspa, right?
Sure.
Based on your knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. So the actual cost that is always going to happen for centralized exchanges, by which we call as integration cost, is very simple, right? It's a straightforward fact that centralized exchanges have to have their employees, the engineers, the blockchain engineers, to do the work to interpret your chain and to add them up to the UI, so you can use it from your mobile app or from the website. And if this is a work that takes up time of people, so the centralized exchange would have to pay the salaries of those guys. So this is a very basic cost of the integration, which I also deem as reasonable and legit. I think, for the same story, sometimes some projects, not centralized exchanges, but let's say Ledger, Live Wallet, they will say, hey, Kaspa community, you integrate yourself and you fundraise for your own community engineers. In that case, that was Rob, I believe, to do the Ledger Live integration. So they won't charge you fees, but you still have to pay the human power fee anyways. So I regard this integration cost of tech staff working on it as a legit one. And the specialty of Kaspa is that it is true that sometimes the Kaspa integration can be challenging, and especially after the Crescendo fork, mostly due to Kaspa's very unique, not just UTXO nature, but also its pruning mechanism, and also the way how it's basically retrieves blocks, for example, not by block heights, and it's way too fast to follow up, But there's a lot of things that these engineers are not familiar with Kaspa about, and they have to spend extra time on it. And that's also why, this kind of integration cost is expected to be higher than integrating another chain, or of course, also higher than integrating a token on the chain. Yeah.
Sure. And I guess, if they really want it, right? If they see there's enough demand out there, they will absorb that cost, right?
Yeah, sure. So
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
that is obviously it's a cost and benefit
yeah,
analysis thing for them. But you should also note that apart from this hard cost of integration of paying your engineers, it's also very important if you're going to spot, at least the cost spot. You also have to build a cost reserve, right? Like it is just like a bank. People want to deposit, they want to withdraw, so you have to have a cost reserve, which means that exchanges will have to acquire or buy costs to put in their own account, and make sure they have a reserve for that. And this takes up money. The rest of the cost, not necessarily in terms of money, are things like they have to have an insurance pool, or they are concerned about the price challenge. This isn't necessarily the case for Kaspa, but this is definitely the case for a lot of other tokens, because the product team control the tokens, they may dump the market. So they have to make sure that they can protect the price, or retain the price level at a certain level. And the last thing is the opportunity cost, which is to say, if they spend this money buying Kaspa, they could have done something else with the money. I don't know, maybe buying Bitcoin, or I don't know, doing something else, but that takes up the cash flow. So these are the costs of listing, in my opinion, from centralized exchanges perspective.
right. And is this coming from your discussions with the exchanges? Like, have they presented a rate card to you with
Oh,
individual line item, and this is what the costs are?
no. I don't think there's any discussion like that. It's just a case. I know a lot of exchanges friends, from smaller ones, like XT or Gate or BitGet, COOs or CEOs, and to bigger ones like Benji of Bybit, and also someone mentioned about the HTX listing, and say that I made adjusting something like that. So I just visualize, and I can tell what stops them from doing it. Because I think this point of opportunity cost is really an important concept. Because it's for business, since your capacity and your time is always limited. It's always about weighing one thing against another one. So when Kaspa has no DeFi or staking benefit, or Kaspa doesn't want to pay the fees, there will be other projects that would like to pay the fees. In the end of the day, centralized exchanges are a business, right? It's a business. So
Yeah.
I think definitely these are the approaches that you should think of, right? And after covering this, basically the costs, we can see that what is on the other side of the Libra, right? What do they actually expect? And this is my second slide. So why in certain cases centralized exchanges are interesting in Kaspa, and why in some other cases they're not that interesting. Okay, so on the left hand you see these are the three, I guess, the most interest, the three top exchanges that the community would want to see Kaspa on. So Binance, OKX, and Coinbase. So on the right hand is that, but I think on the left, the three exchanges are not that interested in Kaspa. I'll explain shortly why. And on the right hand, you can see the exchanges that, they like Kaspa better than the last three ones. So now I explain. So, in my opinion, that there are also four things that exchanges and expect to get out of a listing activity, right? And they will compare this expected outcome to the cost, as I just mentioned. So the first thing is that if they get the users, they will get service fees, right? And these service fees can be derived from spot trading, perp trading, and also a lot of exchanges have lending services. So whatever service you're going to use there, they're going to pay a fee. And of course, the revenue stream from service fees is dependent on the actual volume of these activities, right? How many people are trading Kaspa on this exchange? How many people are doing the Kaspa lending on this exchange? And that's also why market maker is a requirement, because it's assurance of their income of this part. I'll cover this part later. The second thing here is a new market and new KYC users. And this is one of the most important reasons why, people get into KASPA or people don't want to get into KASPA. I mean, by people, I mean exchanges or centralized exchanges. So I'll start to giving examples from this point. So for instance, that Binance, we already have the KASPA futures or KASPA perps listed on Binance back in 2023. It means that if you're a KASPA trader, most likely that you already have the Binance app. So you're already a KYC user for Binance. So Binance was saying, okay, if I release KASPA Spot now, what's going to happen? It's not going to bring me any new KYC users from the KASPA communities because they're already my KYC users. So sarcastically, that the community Binance, the Buy Binance initiative and the movement to call for people deleting their Binance account, I would say they're going to be very useful. Because it is true that KYC users is one of the most important data that exchanges look into, right? You can also see that after the Binance Blockchain Week, finished last week, CZ and Binance are celebrating that they have over 300 million users. So the KYC user number is one of the most important figures. However, before listing actually happens, right, you don't know whether or not you will get these users. You can only speculate, right? As I said, Binance will speculate it won't get too many new KYC users because it already has it. But on the right side, even you see HTX and Kraken and Upbit, they tell a completely different story. For Kraken, that's used to, doesn't really do retail business and exchange. It doesn't face individual users, it faces institutions. For them, they need a lot of inflow of KYC users. And the KASPA community in America or in Europe is their target users. So that is why that they will care about this and they think they can get a very positive feedback from that. That is also why, back in last year when Kraken first listed the trading pair of KASPA versus USD, notice that's not KASPA versus USDT, that's just KASPA versus USD. The Kraken was also excited by the fact that the listing post got over 1 million, I think 1.4 million or 1.3 million impressions or views on Whale's Twitter, right? Because for them, these are very likely to be an indicator of how many new KYC users will get into them because they have zero from KASPA community before. So for HTX and Upbit, the story is also kind of similar, right? Because HTX has basically no English speaking communities or market. So they feel like, hey, if we do KASPA listing, maybe we will get the KASPA people attention and they can become my new user, right? Again, although they don't know it's just going to be true, but they can speculate. And according to their data, they may think this is actually something true. Similarly for Upbit, where they work around the Korean market, we tried the same idea to talk to them about, hey, you want foreign markets, but maybe that's not their priority at the moment. And the last comment to add here is that from the foundation's perspective, we also think that working with these exchanges might potentially give us opportunity to expose to new users for KASPA as well, right? Because you can easily imagine that an HTX Chinese trader have no access to information of KASPA before, right? Or Upbit Korean users didn't know KASPA before. So that's why we see these partnerships are good ones, while we think paying the fees for, let's say, Binance may be not that ideal if Binance doesn't really treat KASPA with specialty. It's just one of the many products trading, then it's totally pointless to pay any fees to Binance.
That's cool. It's not just one size fits all. It's going to be different things for different exchanges, and they have different business models. And as you're explaining, right, specifically how Kraken is different from HTX, and how the biggest ones are different from the rest of them. So I guess just on the the first slide, I wanted to ask you. So have you? I remember speaking to Wolfie earlier in the year. I think it was June this year, where Wolfie said he was talking actively to Binance. So has Binance put up a cost to you guys, to Wolfie, to yourself, to Kev? Hey, this is our cost.
Yeah, let me do it in this slide because I will tell a lot of stories about these exchanges. Some of these I believe are no longer confidential. Some of these I will try to hide their names. But again, I will just think it's helpful to finish the slide first, and I
Sure.
will jump directly to the to the stories, right? Okay, so yeah, so another thing that exchanges care about is about if people will deposit money in and have asset accumulation. And this is directly related to how we got one of the exchanges that recently list us. And again, I will talk about this in the story part as well. And the last thing just to cover here is that when centralized exchanges uh, listed, let's say if you're a Kaspa users and you go on FTX, for example, they also expect you to trade other assets on their platform later with their promotional activities and so on. For instance, FTX may expect to trade their platform token, which is FTX, or trade Trump on their platform because they can also charge service fees. Very quickly, related to one of your previous questions about volume, and is this figure that I just find, I think it's kind of up to date. So I feel like it's not for us. It's not always a problem if we're not on major exchanges. You can see the Bybit and BitGet volume and Cracker volume are okay here, like top 3, top 4. So you can see that sometimes the trading volume of the spot is not that much as people imagine, and that's why maybe Binance or Coinbase or any exchange that haven't listed on Kaspa was saying, hey, we may not get that much from service fees compared to the volume you can see in here. So maybe we want to care more about the new market and KYC users, about the user acquisition itself, because user acquisition is also kind of the same thing, not exactly the same thing, but the same of the deposit accumulation. Right. So now getting back to your question about what Binance did, and I can tell you a little bit about the story of Binance and OKX and Coinbase and Korean exchanges and HTX, each of them. So look, the key word here is that there's a lot of rent-seeking power in the process of the listing. All right. So sometimes this appear in terms of you will be speaking with people from the so-called research branch of the centralized exchange. I mean, I'm not trying to say that this actually happened with us, but look, L Bank had its research branch to talk with you before listing. Um, um, Similarly, Binance also have a so-called research branch to speak with you before listing, and they will give you the initial package of offer of how many tokens they would ask for. I do want to, before I talk about why this doesn't fit Kaspa, I do want to highlight why sometimes this makes sense to the exchanges. It is extremely important for the Kaspa, for all of us to understand that precisely because most of the other projects are not based on proof of work, which means they just print out their tokens. So the exchanges are also concerned if the project team will dump the token once it gets listed on Binance or a good exchange. That's why they ask for the tokens. So if you're gonna dump, they also have the tokens to dump before you do that to stop you from doing it. So that's one of the mechanisms. There are a lot of mechanisms like that. So therefore, during that process of speaking with the research team, they already ask, for instance, propose a model of saying, hey, you need to pay this amount of tokens to the exchange for the sake of, you can call it, it's a security deposit or an insurance or something, and sometimes part of the money can be refunded. So the first step is that you will speak with a research team. So there's no, before speaking with the listing team, you'll be speaking with a research team, which tells you what materials you should prepare, which due diligence documents you need to fill in, and what might the plan of paying the fee look like. How much of those goes to like technical integration? How much of those goes to marketing campaigns? How much of those goes to insurance pool that might partly be refunded, or that is partly refundable? So that is one thing of getting to the listing fee. For the case of Binance, because we used to have, not we, okay, by we I mean the Kaspa, the Kaspa people who spoke with Binance before, which is Ray and Woofy, that they used to have an old Telegram chat room with Binance back in 2023 for the perp listing of Kaspa on Binance. So they speak again, and they always speak in that room. And this time that we receive a bid, that information is not directly shared with Wolfie, but we shared with him later on, because they asked for the price, which is the number you see on the post of hashtag. So that is what happened between Binance and us.
There are 6 exchanges, 6 tier 1 exchanges that haven't listed Kaspa. And there are obvious reasons, as you've highlighted, right? So, between Coinbase, Binance, and OKX, so is there any current communication with those 3?
Yeah, there's always ongoing conversations. So yeah, let me get this one by one. And again, I think these are very fun stories that community will love to hear of. They're just quite interesting, and since they want to know what's going on with it. All right. So yeah, following this slide, I think the very important thing that the community needs to be aware of is that for certain reasons, sometimes intentional and sometimes not intentional, the process of listing any token, even if it's not Kaspa, let's say it's some random token I launched myself on BNB or on Solana, that you don't get to speak with again the listing guys, or sometimes you don't even get to speak with the ones that they're actually from this exchange. I'll give an example. If you want to list let's say exchange B, okay, it's not Binance, but let's say exchange B, some exchange B. So you will get in a Telegram group with 2 people, you don't know who they are. They claim that they are from Binance or they're from exchange B. Again, this is not the case of Binance. They're from exchange B. And they say, hey, look, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we will get you listed on exchange B. So they're not even like, they don't give an email, they don't give an identity verification, and you don't know if you do as what they say, will you actually get the listing offer. Now, I think some exchanges intentionally do this because you literally cannot find any public information about like their stuff, right? I think a Coinbase did a far better job on this issue. Like, even if they ask a fee, they brought it on the table. They say, hey, this is Coinbase and we want da 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 da, and this is something you should check if you can meet our demand or so. For other exchanges, a lot of times they intentionally keep this like a black box, like a blind box. So there's a lot of rent-seeking power that's sneaking to say, hey, I'm a KOL, for instance, in Korean market, and I can get you on Upbit or Korean exchanges, and you don't know if they can do that at all. All right, that's quite common happening. Now, coming to the story with OKX and other exchanges. So with OKX, it's kind of the same story, and that's why the community asked about, why KEF used to claim it's has investment from OKX Ventures and why it's no longer happening, what's going on. So one of the issues is that, look, I won't say if this is about a disagreement or a misconception of what we agreed on, but we did some events together because sometimes the actual fees they're paying are under the names of marketing campaigns or trading contests or blah 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 blah. So we thought that after the event that Kaspa should be spot listed on OKX, right? And we paid quite a bunch of money, maybe around like $1 billion US dollars for this partnership. Again, this is not a single exchange issue, but it's just turned out the case that in the end we found we're still not getting listed, and we feel that it's very difficult to walk through such listing process without a without a contract saying, hey, you will get listed or not get listed. So that's a story with OKX. So we always spoke with them. For instance, with KRC20, OKX wallet was one of the wallets that claimed to be the first one to integrate KRC20 and support Kaspa, but also for some reasons that they canceled that plan. The major argument and observation here is that a lot of times that these decentralized exchanges can have backs and forces with their plans, and there's not much you can do about it. So that's one of the major difficulty for any listing activity of any coins or tokens, which basically you cannot change about. Yeah.
So did you say you paid committed or paid OKX $1 million and still did not get the listing. That's a
Well,
big amount
yeah,
for an ex.
for the sake of accuracy of the wording and to just not to get any drama or conflict, let's put it this way: the KEF pay for some events with with OKX, or for some partnerships that we used to believe is let's say is a prelude to the spot listing. Again, it's very tricky to say, and I cannot call this as, in legal terms, a default of agreement, but that is unexpected and that is not meeting our expectation. Yeah, that's it for the OKX part, because I have to, if I keep going on information, loading, then it's not ideal for anyone here. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, Junny, I don't think we need to discuss anything confidential. So please, of course, that's between yourself and the entity, obviously, if you sign NDAs and whatnot, right? But I think it's more the non-confidential, the where NDAs have expired and you're happy to share, those details. That's perhaps what I'm interested in, right?
Yeah. So I guess, with the OKX story, like the takeaway is that, sometimes listing is not like saying, hey, it's black and white. If you list, you list. If you don't, you don't. If you do this, you list. It's not like it's not working that way. So the second quick fun story with another exchange, again, which is an exchange that recently got listed Kaspa, is like this. So I know a lot of, basically BDs and big client managers that they have a KPI. So you define, let's say, you or other people who can deposit over 100,000 US dollars in their account. So what I did is that I made a few friends of mine, like 30, 32 or 33 of them, go to that exchange and deposit around like 80K to 90K dollars. So, the managers were like a little bit, anxious, saying, hey, why don't you put in a little bit more money so we will get our KPIs done, right? That's a good thing.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And I made those guys say, hey, look, that's all the USDTs and all the money I've got. I only have Kaspa remaining. So if you want me to be, meet that $100,000 line, you would have to list Kaspa. So I can deposit in my Kaspa, then you'll get your KPIs done, right? So this story is saying that sometimes if you want to do it, the listing, you have to acknowledge the needs of these exchanges. And therefore, sometimes to do a little bit tricky strategy, to get them to agree to the listing.
Yeah. Interesting. So just wanted to clarify, OKX, it wasn't $1 million, as you say, for the sake of listing. It was the events and other things you guys agreed on, and then you participated on those things.
Right.
So I guess I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't, agreed between both parties. That was the cost. It was certain other things, perhaps, that you guys were doing together.
Yeah. You should understand it that way, but also for obvious reasons, right? Like, why would someone wants to do the same with OKX, right? Like, yeah. But anyways, yeah. That's a correct interpretation. Yeah.
But and the second part, this exchange where you actually asked your friends to deposit, which exchange was this?
You better not tell that, or we're going to affect. Yeah, don't name call that. Yeah.
All right, good. No, thank you. I thought I'd misheard or I just didn't hear it, so I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
cool. All right. So why don't we quickly touch upon then HTX? That's the exchange that I think people have asked you for, right? And as you say, they have all the interest to list Kaspa. So are you in discussion with them? Where is that listing for that exchange?
Again, that's some people don't know about HTX. It's the old HT, and it's one of the oldest exchanges in the world. It's now taken over by Justin Sun. But actually, you have a lot of former HT team that working in different exchanges like Bitget and Bybit. The listing head used to be an employee of the old HT. Yeah, so I think that we will finish paying the fees and all the testing by this week, and we will get an official announcement in this week. The contemporary date we will try to shoot for HTX for listing is around Christmas or before Christmas. So you will see an official statement quite recently.
Awesome.
It's also the fact that some people see that HTX account start to tease with the Kaspa community, and getting those mini Kaspa logos here and there and play the hide and seek games with the community. I think that's I feel that was a very good interaction when I saw it for the first time, but I feel it's a little bit too much when you're doing like a third time or the fourth time without proper listing time. So I basically told them to stop to do that. But them stop doing that is basically a reflection of my thought that this kind of teasing result enough, but it's not good. I said you can do that as much as you want and have fun with our huge community members after there's announcement. So there's nothing changed for the listing. It's just that I feel they should stop putting the mini logo for hide and seek games. So people should not worry about that at all. Yeah.
I see. And are you okay if you're not under any NDAs? Are you okay to discuss the fees that you had to pay or Kev had to pay for the HTX listing?
I can only talk about the number like next year this time, but I can tell you I think the fee is reasonable, and I feel that again this is potentially a good opportunity because both sides see opportunities in expanding new markets across each other. For us, it may be a good chance for us to reach out to the Chinese speaking communities, which has always been a large part of the crypto world. And the traders, I actually think it's not a good idea to leave the Chinese community behind, just because there are, compliance or regulatory concerns here. And for them, again, they think that Kaspa community is again, a very active and a very energetic community that's across the world. That's something they need. So I see the fees as reasonable, and I think it's a good initiation of the partnership. Yeah.
All right. So what are the other things that exchanges are interested in, perhaps? And you've got a slide for us here.
Yeah, sure. So, in this part I will talk about before the market making part is the last part that I will talk about. How Kaspa presents itself differently to centralized exchanges. Why sometimes a good thing, why part of it's not a very good thing. So again, that Kaspa is a revolutionary technology, and the Kaspa community definitely made the right pick to decide to buy this one. But you have to realize that people are not familiar with POW except Bitcoin. People are not that well aware of the technological advancement. So a few things here. The first thing is that every time centralized exchanges list itself, it wants a listing effect. Basically, if I list a new asset, I want to encourage people to use my exchange and buying this asset. And when they're buying, I hope they can get money from it. So I also charge the service fees. So that is why I put a illustration here. You can see every time for most of the coins, not just Kaspa, for most of the coins and tokens, when they get listed, the opening price is always like it manually turned to a very low position. So people can see, I pumped a lot. Of course, that's not the real price at all, right? People know it. It's like it's a open secret. So for Kaspa, the thing is, it's a very high volume project, and it's 100% fair launch, which means there's zero possibility to manipulate the market to do a price upward movement, and just because of listing. I would even say this: even if Binance listed on spots, at best you will see like a 20% upward move for most. But for smaller coins or tokens that are on Binance Alpha, you can see like maybe 10 times or I don't know. That's why, so you have to tell the centralized exchanges, hey, even if a leaf starts, I cannot assure you that the price will behave nicely because we are a decentralized project. And then the second thing, and this is very, very important, like we also had the same problem when we try to do the DAT, the digital treasury asset stocks, earlier this year, is that Kaspa as a proof of work coin has a max supply, right? Many people know, but Solana, Ethereum, and Tron, these chains, they have no max supply. The way that they maintain a deflationary model is that they have to burn out the fees, and to make sure whatever they burn out, the amount is larger than the amount that they newly issued. In this way, they make sure it's still not creating any inflation. But the good part of that is that the newly issued coins usually goes to stakers, right? Because they're POS, the proof of stake network.
Exactly, yeah.
So if the exchanges had a lot of these coins, let's say Ethereum or Solana, they can also generate staking benefit. For Kaspa, they cannot generate any staking benefit because Kaspa has limited max supply. There's no staking rewards, and there's no DeFi rewards at least for now. And that is why the opportunity cost point matters a lot here. Because let's say they spend $10 million buying a Kaspa reserve, they're not getting any interest payment on it. But if they spend that doing Solana reserve, they're going to get staking benefits. So this is also a reason why Kaspa is presented very differently to centralized exchanges. The last thing I want to highlight here is also an example related to finance. So in 2024, the most trending coin of the year is the coin called TON. It's very interesting because TON used to be a proof of work coin as well. And it got on Binance after it's 100% mined. How did it get on there? So firstly, it's of course a popular coin because it's it's correlated with Telegram, right? So people know what it is. But still, it has a difficulty because Binance doesn't believe that what this coin will bring to them. So they say, look, I'm going to list one of your ecosystem coins first, which is not on TON. And the coin name is not coin. So the ticker is NOT, as you can see here. The ticker is NOT. So on May the 16th, 2024, the NOT coin, which is NOT, with this icon, got listed on Binance first. And then it got Binance about 600,000 new KYC users. And then Binance like
600,000. That's massive.
Yeah, that's massive. So immediately Binance like, okay, we're gonna list TON without a listing fee. So that happened 3 months later, right, on August 14th. So why do I mention about that? Because the exchanges, they can compromise. I mean, again, in this case, in the case of Kaspa, it's not Binance, but some exchanges will compromise and tell us, hey, it's okay if I don't charge Kaspa any fees. But look, well, you have a lot of coins or tokens, actually, these new tokens will come to our exchange and list themselves, so I can charge them listing fee. So I also put the icon of Kango and Nacho here because they get on some of the centralized exchanges, and the community can ask them if to pay the listing fee, right? I think, of course, they do, either in terms of US dollars or in terms of their own tokens, they have to pay that fee. It means that if I run a centralized exchange, and I list in Kaspa, I do hope to see a lot of, let's say, 100 more projects from Kaspa that launch their own assets and list their tokens on my exchange, so I get to charge fees from them, right? So this is why KRC20 and other assets in Kaspa on Kaspa is actually important. But it's also why I feel that we should also treat the demands or the needs of the DGen groups or the asset holders or buyers or traders as a good thing, because that's what centralized exchanges want. Beforehand, Kaspa was like, well, we only have Kaspa on Kaspa, so if you list on Kaspa, you only list Kaspa. There's nothing more other than that saying you can do. Yeah, and that's not doing as a favor with that argument. Yeah,
right. No, I think it's a good case you make here, Junny. If Kaspa wants to be on these tier 1 exchanges, then this is one of the ways that the listing can be hosted on those exchanges, right? Like through your ecosystem coins, right? So is that the reason why KEF initially funded KRC20 and then obviously subsequently KASPAX?
Funding KRC20 is more about trying to give transaction fees to miners as well. It's not really a matter of just having more asset types. I think a relevant example here is that if some people paid attention to KF events last year in Thailand, you will see that we're trying to work closely with some Telegram projects and trying to persuade them to launch their tokens on Kaspa. The reason being, at that moment, there is a coin called MENEFI, MENEFI, that was a token that releases these tokens 100% one time to the community, and that project turned to be the top traded token on OKX for about 14 days. By top traded, it means the largest number trading that token. So we were also told by then, if we can work around something like that. And OKX in that year was spending a lot of resources on its protocol called OKX Connect. That's something they bet on Telegram. So we were always trying to cater into the taste of exchanges more or less. But yeah, the entire design of KRC20 and EVM KASPAX, it's not just for exchanges. It's just for assets and asset launch, because everything is essentially around the assets. In the end of the day, yeah.
definitely helps miners if there are fees generated. But I think it's a good case, perhaps, that you have presented. Now, on the exchanges, have we missed out or have we not discussed anything
No,
specific?
I think we're fully covered. If there's one thing I want to add in the end, I criticize Kaspa projects for launching a token on my Twitter. I want to give it basically a correction. So it's not a case that I'm against asset launch. I think boarding what hashtag said in Discord, we are fine with projects that already in use to launch an asset. I'll give an example. So you must have heard of Pump Fund, right? So Pump
Yeah, of
Fund is
course.
one of the most successful projects, I would argue. And look, like it used to only charge Solana as fees, and then it only launched its token, which is Pump, like in late 2025, like September or August this year. So you can launch an asset, and that's a good thing, but you better not do it, before you have your service or product online. That's what I'm saying. I definitely think that launching more assets is a good thing if these assets have actual value with a product. So that's just a correction for what I have there. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I think the big highlight here is, it's great for people to learn how the plumbing works, how the back end of the exchanges work, and obviously to understand who's footing the bill, because I think that's a big part of it, right? Like there has to be someone else to foot the bill, right? Sometimes. So that being said, why don't we move on to the market maker discussion, and specifically the market makers Kef has been working with.
Sure. Yeah. I'll try to keep this the presentation short so I can get to the question. So
please, yeah.
Yeah. So facts come first. That again, I cannot disclose all of the market makers we work with, but one of them is definitely DW Labs. I understand, and I do believe I understand this very well because I was in the crypto world for a long time. That DW Labs have I received a lot of criticisms. For a lot of different reasons. Let's not focus on that part. But what I do want to defend for them, at least in the deal of Kaspa, is that firstly, that DWS made a life based on their abilities doing trades. So they don't make a life by building good connections or looking good to people. Their team was originally from the IMC trading. So that's a very famous high frequency trading firm. So they don't care about their PR figure a lot of times. They just say, yeah, I can make a living by trading. So whatever market maker we're working with, or we can promise is that the loan size we offer to these market makers is smaller than 11 million CAS. So it's a very small amount. In fact, it is a case that these market makers are doing me a favor because of knowing that Kaspa community is promising, that they believe that Kaspa will thrive or will be successful in the future. So they will say, okay, we didn't need that much loan size, or they want to work with us. So, it would be unfair, therefore, I have to say this, to try to blame our partners who want to try to help with Kaspa, presence in the market to say that they dump the tokens simply because they don't have the tokens to dump, or they don't have the coin to dump the market. And their strategies are mostly delta neutral. And there's spots on Kraken and other places, and perps on Binance. So yeah, it's okay to do Binance movement, but that perps is still useful as a hash tool for people who want to loan Kaspa, and also the options on coin calls. Another thing I want to highlight here, again, very quickly, that there are potential strategic partnership that we encourage the community to pay more attention to. For instance, the Falcon stablecoin, this logo here. So last year I said, hey, do people want this? And it was like, no, we don't want that. But if you go back to look at it today, you can see this is also, I would say, a very good stable coin with good reserves, and that is secure. And that would be very helpful for the Kaspa community because it could have been introduced to the Kaspa world like last year, but people were saying like, no, we don't want it. But anyways, yeah. So that's what I can share in terms of facts. If you are interested in that, you can contact me, and if you want to do loans or market making with us, so I can share with you more information. That's definitely something I'm willing to do. I just cannot share, everything with everyone publicly. That's simply impossible. And there are also a lot of, again, market makers, GSR, Amber, Wintermute, the top ones. By the way, Amber is a listed company as well in NASDAQ. So they're all very interested in Kaspa, and they want to figure out a good way to work with the Kaspa community. I think again, that's a charm of the technology and the community who brought them to actually speak to us instead of us working to them to talk about it. But sure, what's the questions that you would like to ask about?
Yeah. I mean, market making is my favorite topic. So, so so I want to take a step back first. So I think it's good for people to understand where market makers come in, what is their role, and how they work with an exchange, right? So perhaps we can start from that specific question. According to you, what is the role of a market maker in this equation, and how they work with an exchange?
Sure. So market makers jumping when there's let's say there's not enough liquidity or there's too big a spread between the seller price and the buyer price. It jumps in, and that's very, very, very true, right? It jumps in primarily mostly for exchanges. That's why exchanges will say, hey, you have to hire a market maker, because then you have the volume there and they can earn their money and so on. So this is what market makers do. They're like by nature in alliance with exchanges. And that's why in some exchanges, if you go to their fee table, you can see they even have negative fee rates for market makers that trade a huge volume on the exchange every single day. So for exchanges, that's what market maker does. And if you're interested or anyone is interested, you can check the relationship between DBAS and Binance before. Again, that's not a topic for this session. For the user side, again, for a lot of other projects, especially for meme tokens, that market maker is a devil, right? Because the project team will give a lot of tokens to the market maker, so the market maker can manipulate the price and so on. But that is definitely not the situation for Kaspa. The Kaspa users, because it's fair-launch projects, again, no one have that many coins, and the Kaspa users mostly benefit from market makers, just by benefiting from the liquidity, right? Nothing else than that.
Yeah. No, thank you. Exactly. I think as you pointed out, right? For me personally, market makers are even more important than the exchanges themselves.
Yeah.
This is my opinion, right? Because and most of the tier one exchanges would want the project to bring the market maker to them, right? So they expect you to have some sort of arrangement with the market maker. Right, that's my understanding. Right, tier one, not all exchanges, but tier one would want, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. Market makers are there to bring liquidity and create effective order book, right? As you're pointing out, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah,
minimize the spread, as you're saying, because end of the day, market maker is the one who's actually buying and selling from you, right?
Right, exactly.
Right, on the tier one exchanges. So,
I think this is an open secret, and I don't think there's any confidentiality regarding this. So, as I said, for the second time, when Kraken did USDT and Kaspa trading pair, it is a requirement that we have to assure, a volume. Basically, they want you to assure that there's going to have volume. So that's something they definitely ask for. However, I think that, look. It is important to understand that exchanges doesn't really care about your price movement. Okay, like again, it's not like they don't care at all. Like they, of course, again, as I said, if it's just a newly listed asset, they want to have a price market because it looks nice. But in overall, it doesn't care that much about your price behavior, like performance. Basically for the reasons that they are taking fees from the deals and orders and trading activities. It doesn't really matter if the price is high or is the price is low. That's important. And maybe surprisingly, it's also true that at least for a project like Kaspa, which has over even today like about 1 billion plus market cap, both market makers and exchanges don't dare to bet on a single trending let's say price movement, and that's their primary risk come from. As market makers, when they say they're doing data neutral strategies, they have to make sure that there's this extreme price movement that basically liquidated all of these positions. They don't have incentive for either of those.
So delta neutral basically means that a market maker wants to limit their exposure. If the price goes higher or goes lower, they want to be, in a way, they want to limit their exposure to zero, right? Or otherwise, in actually financial term, they want to be delta zero, close to delta zero, right, as much as possible, right?
Yeah.
Because end of the day, they're making money on the spreads. They're not making money, at least a very high level. That's not how they make money, right?
So for instance, like by delta neutral, it means that you should always set the initial delta as 0 and to basically control the delta hedge according to your gamma. I'll give you an example. Let's forget about the Kaspa spot. Let's say if you want to put a delta neutral portfolio by option and let's say Binance Kaspa purse. All right. So for instance, you find that in recent months, and there's an ATM call and the IV is surprisingly high. Then what are you going to do to construct a delta neutral portfolio? What you're going to do is that you're going to sell that call on Queen call, right? Then you're going to sell that option call on an option market, and then you're going to buy or sell the CAS USDT purse, Binance purse, to make the initial delta as 0. And then according to your gamma, you have to frequently do your delta hedge. And the technical part of HFT for delta neutral is that you have to have a good control of the pace of hedging and the way you make your orders, and also the control of the slippage rate, right? Like the slippage. So there are different ways of doing delta neutral, but in general, like and by the way, there are a lot of other things to consider. For instance, like you can be a maker in one market and be a taker on another market. So in this way, you can deal with your, delays of the network and to change your liquidity structure so that you have a positive equation or things like that. So again, unlike people thinking, hey, this is the casino gambling mode. So these market makers, they have the tokens, they always, dump the price and get everything in control, and they have 99% in control. They pump the price. No, that's, I mean, can that make money? That can make a lot of money. But again, for institutions or large money groups, the primary concern is always a control of the risk, right? And doing that is too risky. That is something they cannot tolerate, right? What if I accumulate all these coins and nobody wants to buy it off, right? And what if I borrow your coins and I dump it to the market? I can never buy it back. What if there's a very strong buying power? So yeah, it's more complicated than people imagine. Yeah.
So let's talk about then the market makers that you work with, or KEF has or is working with.
I can only tell you among the logos here, we work with some of them, and the only interesting one is that for the past year we worked with DWF, and we're in a stage that to decide if we will keep working with them again. I can talk about DWF because they are the ones who will publicly talk about the customer. They have a Twitter post about it. So I cannot tell you which of these we actually work with in which ways. But sure, definitely more than one of them here.
Okay, more than one you work with. Okay, and so what is the arrangement? I mean, given you are the one who brought up this topic itself, so it's great to actually discuss this. So what is the arrangement with these market makers? I mean, typically a foundation, Solana Foundation, Ethereum Foundation would actually lend out some of the tokens that they have to the market makers, right? Which would work with an exchange to obviously facilitate the listing, or obviously make sure that they have enough supply reserve.
Yeah.
So how do you guys, or KEF works with one of the market makers that you've got on the screen?
Yeah. I'm very happy to answer that. Very happy to answer that question. Okay, so basically, when we started work with these market makers by last year, like September or August, we almost at our all-time high, right? And many people will say, yeah, it's all because market makers. But again, like I tell you, the low end size now, that it's not about that. In fact, that by then we were mostly concerned with the counterparty risk, because it is true that when you give that loan, when you give that money out, it's no longer something in your control, right? And the humble message I'm sending here is that we did consider that, and we care about that more than anyone else, because if something bad happens, it hurts our value, I guess, more than most of the people in this market and the community. So that's why by then we only offer very small loans, basically to make the minimum requirement, so that people can have the services or exchanges are happy to list Kaspa. So that's literally what we're trying to do, because we are trying our best to control this counterparty risk, and we are trying our best to make exchanges happy to at least us. When it's getting to this year, of course, we are in another pleasant position of the price comparing to last year. The story is different. So that is why we're doing this session to tell the community what we're working, how we work with market makers, and we want to explore if there are other community members that wants to work with maybe work with these market makers as part of wealth management, or approach them also for the sake of having more price movements around the Kaspa price. I don't know what that's specifically gonna be. So that is why we feel like it shouldn't be the case that only KEF is representing itself talking to market makers. It should be the case that the literally the big whales of the Kaspa community who has the tokens, we should come together and figure out a good solution and speak with these market traders on what we can do to help with the price of Kaspa. If they need more loan, are we happy to give them? And what they're going to do with that? Can we get assurance or get a promise, or either way for us to make sure that they're not going to dump the tokens or the coins? So that's something we are looking forward to exploring around, to make this a collective effort, not just by myself or by KF itself.
Now, obviously, you highlighted counterparty risk, and I guess I want to reiterate, it is the biggest risk in finance is counterparty risk. If the other party doesn't stick to what you agreed on, right, or defaults, or so many things could happen to the other party. So but at least this is your pledge. Well, not pledge, actually. You're reaching out to the community that there are options if they wanted to do something with the Kaspa sitting in their wallet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's of course the right interpretation. And if I have to add to that, is that again, even if people say they're doing data neutral, right? And I just want to make sure that people understand what that looks like, right? Because by data neutral, we say then the revenue source can be a vector arbitrage, right? So your P&L will come from the theta and the vector, which is the backward drop of IV. And if there's no volatility, the price movement is quite stable. You can also make money by selling the gamma. So there are a lot of ways doing this, right? The problem here, that's why we have to talk about counterparty risk, is that you don't know if they're doing data neutral or not, right? There's no way for you to go in to check, hey, are you doing data neutral? Can you show me your strategy? Of course they can. That's what they make a living on, right? So that is why it's always requires a very high level of trust, and also a strong confidence in the fact that this trader, maybe sometimes is an in-house trader working with you, or a market maker that is not in-house. They have to be very confident in your project or in this token or in this coin, so that they will be willing to figure out a strategy with collaboration to help push the price of the coin to the new level. And we think that level of endeavor of collaboration cannot just solely be done by the market makers and by KF. And this definitely requires more participants of the big Kaspa holders from the community. And this is where we're very open to talks and conversations. We are pretty comfortable bringing them to, let's say, Andre of DRF, or the co-founder of Amber or GSR, to talk about potential ways of doing things, so that everyone is on the same page of trying to help with the price of Kaspa and Kaspa adoption in general. Again, that collaboration and coordination is not just about KEF. KEF is only let's say a facilitator as a small part of this community.
There is around 11 million Kaspa that's been lent out, right? So that's of 27 billion Kaspa. So it is 0.04% of the total supply. So it's a very small percent of the supply, right? That's been lent out. So that's very good to know.
I just feel that, again, we are very sensitive to the price change. We are very sensitive to any potential threat to the price. Yeah, I just again to re-emphasize what I just said, it's just about to find a way to have a big collaboration with the community and these market makers, the market players, and exchanges to make sure the price is really well. Yeah.